Bethlehem College and Seminary is still accepting applications for the coming academic year. For more information, visit bcsmn.edu.
Well, the theme for chapel this semester is the glory of God and the common good. And so last year, you'll remember, our fall theme focused on abiding in Jesus. What does that mean? John 15, especially, abiding in Jesus as the true vine. Apart from him, we can do nothing. And then from there, in the spring, we saw kind of the expression of abiding in Jesus in uncommon virtues, private, personal traits and qualities, excellencies that issue forth from our lives by the power of the Holy Spirit. This wasn't intentional, but it worked out that way, and so I just thought I'd draw attention to it. This semester could be seen as a kind of further flowering of both of those. Both, what does it mean to abide in Jesus, and then what are the personal qualities and traits that flow from us individually and as a community as it overflows into our public and common life. Now, perhaps you've heard the accusation against Christians, sometimes attributed to Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr. They are so heavenly minded that they are no earthly good. So heavenly minded, they are no earthly good. And the heart of that criticism is that Christians, in pursuit of heavenly and eternal things and setting their mind on things above, can neglect their earthly and their temporal responsibilities. The world can go to hell in a handbasket for all that we care. We've got our ticket to the New Jerusalem. That's all that matters. And if we're honest, I think that sentiment has sometimes been true. It is possible to neglect or despise or to slack in earthly duties out of a misguided but pious spirituality. But on the other hand, I think that C.S. Lewis had the best answer to Holmes's sentiment. He said, "If you read history, you will find that the Christians who did most for the present world were precisely those who thought most of the next. It is since Christians have largely ceased to think of the other world that they have become so ineffective in this one." In other words, it's those who set their mind on things above that have been most fruitful in things below. And it's that vision that I want us to consider this semester. I want us to think more deeply about various aspects of the common good and the Christian's distinct relation to it. And so in this first message, my main goal is to clarify some terminology and bring together especially three big items: the glory of God, the Tao, what Lewis called the Tao, and the common good. And so I think I've got 8 or 9 points that I'm just going to walk through and unpack. This isn't a straight expositional message. This is more of a framework kind of message, so you'll be able to follow along just fine there. So I'm going to start at the top, start at the beginning, start where we as Christians must start. God is the ultimate good. God is the ultimate good. Here's Herman Bavinck. This is the front. This is the very first chapter of Wonderful Works of God. It's a great way to start a book like that. Here's Bavinck. God and God alone is man's highest good. In a general sense, we can say that God is the highest good of all his creatures. For God is the creator and sustainer of all things, the source of all being and of all life, and the abundant fountain of all goods. All creatures owe their existence from moment to moment solely to him who is the one eternal and omnipresent being. But the idea of the highest good usually includes the thought that this good is also recognized and enjoyed as such by the creatures themselves. In other words, God is the highest good of everything, but there's a special sense in which for intelligent creatures that have minds and hearts, he is their highest good in a special way because he is known and enjoyed as such by them. This is why the Westminster Catechism confesses man's chief end is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. This is man's chief end because God is man's highest good. So those go together. Our chief end and the highest good go together. God is spirit, infinite, eternal, and unchangeable in his being, wisdom, power, holiness, justice, goodness, and truth. He is all sufficient and all satisfying, and we were made for him, and our hearts are restless until they find their rest in him. That's number one. We start there. We must start there. Number two, God is the maker, sustainer, and giver of every created good. This follows from the first. Every good and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there's no variation or shadow due to change. Every good that is good comes from the good that is God. Every good that is good comes from the good, capital G, that is God. Created goods are the sunbeams that lead us back to God, who is the sun. They are the rivers and streams that carry us to God, who is the ocean. So at this point, you could begin to think, working down from God to creation, all the different kinds of created goods. Like there are physical goods, like food. There are relational goods, like friends and family. There are vocational goods, like teaching. And these goods are all different. They're distinct, and each of them has a kind of objective value of their own, given to them by God. As beams from the sun, they all partake in some way of him, even though they're not him. They're distinct from him, and they have their own objective value. Some are worth more, some are worth less. And human beings, as rational and moral agents, meaning we have minds, we have hearts, are capable of recognizing and responding to the objective value, not only of God, but of everything that he made. This is what Lewis called the Tao. So here's number three. So God's ultimate good, maker and sustainer of every created good. And now, human beings, number three, ought to rightly respond to the objective, rational, and moral order of both created and uncreated goods. In other words, human beings ought to live within the Tao. Now, the Tao is Lewis's pithy way of talking about the objective, rational, and moral order of the cosmos. It's embedded in creation, and the Tao includes both that order, objectively out there, and the human way of life that corresponds to it. Okay? And he used it, and just so you know what Tao, what is that? Why does he use that phrase? He wanted to communicate its universality. He wanted to communicate this is something that's obligatory on all peoples at all times and all places. That's why he chose that term. So when the intellect conforms to God's objective order embedded in creation, we talk about truth. Like when your mind fits with the way things are, the term for that is true. When your will conforms to the way things are, that objective order, we speak of goodness, of good. But in both cases, the crucial point is this: the doctrine of objective value, the belief that, this is Lewis, certain attitudes are really true and others are really false to the kind of thing the universe is and the kind of things we are. And crucially, the Tao both is and is not Christian. What was that? It is and is not distinctly Christian. On the one hand, it's not distinctly Christian because it's universal, owing to God's design. It's embedded in the created order and in our nature as human beings. This is why Lewis says another term for this is simply natural law or natural revelation. In fact, you might say that when we think about God's design in terms of our minds, our intellect, we speak of natural revelation. God reveals things to the mind. That's truth, okay? And then when we consider God's design in terms of our will, we speak of natural law or goodness. See how those connect? So mind goes with truth and revelation. Law goes with will and goodness. So it isn't distinctly Christian because it's universal. All men everywhere are under it, in it, and are obligated to obey it. On the other hand, Lewis has a letter that he wrote after he wrote The Abolition of Man, where he talks about the Tao, where he responded to someone. He said this: the Tao is the necessary expression in terms of temporal existence, created existence, of what God, by his own righteous nature, necessarily is. Like, in other words, the Tao just is God's own nature expressed, communicated, and imparted to reality, to the world that he made. In fact, he goes so far as to say that the Tao simply is the Word, capital W, himself, begotten, not made, from a particular point of view. But here I'm wanting to stress the Tao's universal binding character. Human beings don't need a Bible to know the Tao. So the Bible is crucial and important. It's helpful in knowing the duties that God requires of us. It clarifies them, it condenses them, it illustrates them, it expands them, it grounds them, it applies them. It does all of these things for the moral order that God has embedded in creation and in our nature. So the Bible is crucial in that act. Moreover, and more importantly, the Bible testifies to the only remedy for our failure to observe the Tao. You can't get that from nature. You don't get that from creation. The gospel of Jesus is something that you only get from the book. So, here we have three statements. God is man's highest good. He's the maker, sustainer, and giver of every created good. And human beings ought to rightly respond to the objective, rational, and moral order of both created and uncreated goods. So far, so good. Number 4. One of those crucial goods, one of those crucial created goods that we know and enjoy is the common good. So what do we mean by that? I just want you to think for a minute about a simple, individual good. Okay, so think about the food that we're about to have for lunch. So that food is good, both because it sustains and repairs your body, giving you strength to pursue other goods, and it's also good because it pleases your tongue. Those are two senses in which the food we're about to eat is good. When your body repairs itself through that, and when your tongue delights in what you eat, that correspondence is good, and you should know it and enjoy it. But then you could move out from that simple individual dimension to the fact that that food is going to be desired and enjoyed by many people. Like, many of us can and will enjoy the food at lunch. We'll have a mutual interest in the food. Some of you more than others. Beyond that, you can identify, even as you start to think about the food, there's various other relations that people could have to the food. Like, somebody went to the store and bought the food. Someone else prepared the food. All of you are going to pay for the food. And then we're all together going to enjoy the food. So now you've expanded from just a simple food to my tongue to my belly to the shared and somewhat varied relation to the food. Following that? Then you go a step further. You can move from the shared food to the shared meal. And that's a little different. You widen out a little bit. It's not just about the food anymore. Food is only one element of what we're about to share. There's also the conversation at the table, the jokes and laughter, the deepened knowledge of whatever we're talking about it, the deeper knowledge of each other that comes through whatever we're talking about. There's the companionship, that's literally from the Latin, shared bread, fellowship. It's not merely that we have a shared relation to the food, it's that we have now a relation with each other over and in and around the food, which we call the meal. And so now you can step back even farther and you can look at the whole of that common meal, which yields a community. And you can say that that community is also a good. It's no longer a simple material, physical good, like the food. It's now a social or a common good. It's invisible, it's intangible, but it's very, very real. And we hold it in common. One philosopher notes that this logic that we're talking about of communion and communication around physical goods can be summed up as what's mine is ours. Like, when you begin to talk about this thing that is mine is actually ours, and you begin to think of the we, not just the me, you're talking about community. You're talking about something that's common. And then, why not even, so we'll just keep moving out from the food, widening, to once you have a notion of a common good, like the meal we're going to share, we can see that our lives are actually filled with these, like they're everywhere, overlapping, intertwining, reinforcing each other. And then when you begin to reflect on that ensemble of goods held in common by this diverse but stable and identifiable group of people, meaning a community, those goods that a community shares, now you can identify the good of that community, or the common good. And this common good is more than the sum of its parts. It's not merely that the various individual goods and shared interests that make it up come together and you add them up and that's the sum. No, the sum is greater. The parts bring something together, bring something into being that is more than just the isolated pieces. In fact, the reason that we do the school lunches and the reason that we do weekly chapels and the reason that you have a house system and we do events is precisely in order to make possible that greater good, the common good of the Bethlehem College and Seminary community. So here's the definition. Let me just summarize all of that. What do I mean by common good? The common good is a community's self-conscious and shared enjoyment of an ensemble of goods, smaller goods, and shared enjoyment of the community itself. That's what I mean by common good. And it's one of the creative goods that God made and sustains and gives, and which you ought to rightly know and enjoy if you're going to live within the Tao. Move down from there. At this point, I want to say something about the term politics. Okay? For many, politics simply refers to a narrow slice of human existence. It's what online punditry or election cycles or Gallup polls, maybe with some legislation and administration thrown in for good measure. When we think politics, that's what we mean. And for many, if that's what they're focusing on, politics is like a dirty word, basically a necessary evil. Like, yeah, it happens, and if we could figure out a way for it not to happen, we would. That's the narrow sense. I want to actually reclaim an older and broader sense of that term. So Althusius, who was a 16th century German Reformed political theorist, here's how he defined politics. And I want you to think about how this relates to what we just said. Politics is the art of associating men for the purpose of establishing, cultivating, and conserving social life among them. Another term he uses for politics, a synonym for it, he says, is symbiotics. And can our first-year Greek students do that, right? Symbiotics. In other words, it's the art of living together, of shared life. And a chief part of politics then is order. Like a shared life requires structure and integrity and boundaries, order. And so again, think about the meal we're about to have, okay? Because we want the shared meal to serve the common good of this community, it's not a free-for-all, okay? Like there's a line, okay? For our British friends, a queue. There's a line, and you move through the line in an orderly way. Like thought actually has gone into that line. Like you pay at the front, and then you get your plate, and then you get the food. Like imagine if we mixed that one up. And first was the food, and then you paid, and then there was the plates. It would not be near as enjoyable. It would not serve the common good. And then after you pay, and then you get your plate, and then you get your food, you move farther in to the tables farther down so that you don't hinder other people who are coming after you who also want to enjoy this meal. And then more than that, we've established a particular time for lunch. We placed it after chapel. There are no classes happening right now so that we facilitate both chapel attendance and participation in the common meal. We published a schedule ahead of time. Leaders in the community issue exhortations to encourage attendance and participation. And then, beyond all that, you've got all the preparation and planning that goes into each of these events. All why? To establish, cultivate, and conserve social life among us. In other words, though you may not have called it that or thought of it this way, all of the effort that goes into this stuff is politics, according to what Althusius' definition. the order and structuring that enables the planning and cooperation that builds resilience and trust, which enables us to endure when things don't go the way we expect. And so with that broader definition, you can think like, man, a lot of my life is pretty political, right? Your family life, your church life, your school life, your economic life, and yes, your civic life, all of these have a political dimension because politics is simply the recognition that not only are we rational agents and moral agents, we're social beings. From the very beginning, we are born into communities, families, religious communities, nations, and that life together must be conserved and cultivated. So that's number 5. So that's politics. Here's the next one. In a fallen world, all created goods can be corrupted. So because we're fallen creatures, our intellects and our wills are corrupt. We don't obey the teaching of God, whether revealed in the natural order or in Scripture. Our desires and our loves are very easily distorted, and so we go wrong, and we go wrong in, generally speaking, 2 different ways: by abuse or by neglect, by paying these created goods too much regard or not enough. And so you can just think about all those goods we talked about at the beginning, or the categories: desire for food and drink, desire for sex, desire for companionship, desire for wealth and for comfort, love of self, family, love of tribe, love of nation. Every one of those in principle is good. Every one is a gift from God, and every one of them can go wrong, become distorted and destructive. Lewis, again, is excellent on this. When natural loves, natural goods, become gods, they become demons. When natural goods become gods, they become demons, and they bring ruin on those who pursue them as such. So that was 6. In a fallen world, all created goods can be corrupted. Now, 7, restoring that proper order requires diligent attention and effort, both to God first and then to the created things. This is the work of reordering or reformation. And this brings us back to the theme for this semester. Created goods are only truly good and truly themselves when they are rightly related to God. And you can think of this image here, walk away with this one. It's like the solar system, okay? The glory of God is the sun at the center of the solar system. And when that glory is there, all of the planets orbit properly, and they participate in what Lewis calls the Great Dance. And in this case, the planets, and maybe we'll say the planets and their moons, to kind of widen it out even more than that, are the different sort of spheres of human life. So you've got a planet of the self, and you've got a planet of the family, and you've got a planet of the church, and a planet of the school, and a planet of the market, and a planet of the state. And there's moons that orbit around that are all part of that sphere. And every area, every planet is made for the glory of God and must be rightly related to it. Althusius again says, the end or the goal of social symbiotic man is a holy, just, comfortable, and happy life together. That's why they exist. That's what they're for. And apart from the glory of God at the center, there is no true common good. Because the chief end of man, individually and socially, is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. And so that's the ideal. That would be perfect if the individual and the family and the church and the school and the market and the state were all rightly ordered to God and therefore rightly ordered to each other and seeking His glory. And in order to even envision that, that's going to take thought and attention, and it requires faithful action in order to put God in the right spot. But, as I said a second ago, we live after the fall. We live east of Eden. And so this is number 8. In a fallen world, politics more narrowly is the prudential pursuit of justice and the common good. Prudential pursuit of justice and the common good. Now, Dr. Naselli is going to say more about justice next week. I want to say more about prudence. So, at a basic level, what's prudence? This is from last semester, right? Prudence is about rightly adapting means to the end in a particular setting. This means that in order to be wise, if you want to be prudent and wise, you must know first what something is for. Like, you got to know its purpose. You got to know what God's design for it is. And then second, you got to know where you are, like the concrete circumstances in which you find yourself. And then knowing what the purpose of this thing is and where I am in history and time and space, then you use your mind to wisely apply appropriate means in order to fulfill that purpose in this place. And at times, so here's that practical, like you work it down, make it concrete. This means that we take into account the reality of human sinfulness whenever we're trying to adapt means to the end. And we recognize that sometimes that sin so disrupts things that we have to accommodate it. And when we accommodate the reality of sinfulness, we're not necessarily just accommodating sin, we're being wise. And we learn this from God himself. Consider the way that Jesus talks about the laws about divorce in the Old Testament. When the Pharisees bring that to him and say, why'd Moses give a certificate of divorce? He says, he gave it to you because of the hardness of your heart. He was taking that into account. God himself said the ideal, from the beginning it was not so. From the beginning, the ideal, the purpose is one man, one woman, one lifetime. But given the hardness of heart, God himself in his holy law took that into account as he sought to do what was good and to move us toward what was best. So this means that prudence is frequently about aiming for and wisely moving toward an ideal in less than ideal circumstances. It means recognizing the difference between good, better, and best. So just follow me on this one, okay? I'm gonna give you two examples. Number one, like it's good if my son obeys me because he doesn't want to be disciplined. Okay, it's good. His obedience because of fear of punishment is good. It would be better if he obeys me because he wants to walk in fellowship with me and not just because he's afraid of punishment. That would be better. One's good, the other's better. It would be best if he obeys me because it's good and right in the eyes of God, and he wants to honor his heavenly Father by honoring his earthly father. That would be best. But one is good, one's better, one's best. Or again, here's another example. It would be good if doctors refused to mutilate children because of fear of lawsuits and jail time. Like, that would be good. It would be better if doctors refused to mutilate children because they were seeking to live within the Tao and they wanted to live within the objective moral order that exists. But it would be best if doctors refused to mutilate children because they treasured Jesus as the crucified and risen Lord of all, and therefore gladly embraced his purposes for men and women and children. That would be best. And so where am I getting at for that? Gaining clarity about the good, about the ideal, and then growing in prudence to accomplish it in this context, in our circumstances, that's the aim of this semester. Over the next few months, we're going to cover a number of different areas of social life and the common good. Here's some examples. The value of human life and the need to establish, cultivate, and conserve a culture of life in our churches, communities, and this nation's in a particular context, namely a post-Roe v. Wade world. We want to think about that. What does that look like? Second, the centrality of the family for the common good of communities, or the role of politics and elections, more narrowly defined, in pursuing the common good, or the unique challenges of poverty, homelessness, and drugs in our community where we live in the Twin Cities, and the importance of education in establishing the common good for future generations, and the role of free markets and religious liberty in rightly ordering and buttressing a community. All of those are the things we're going to talk about. And we're going to have some that will be messages like this, and others that will be panels with those who work in those areas. And so let me close with a few prayers for this semester from me. This is what I'm hoping. This is what I'm asking God to do, and I invite you to ask with me. First, and most importantly, I pray that we all grow in gratitude for the common good of the various communities that we're involved in. A rightly ordered community, a community that is rightly related to God to various degrees, in various spheres, whether it's the family or the church or the state or the market or whatever. A rightly ordered community is a gift from God. Don't despise the gifts of God. Don't despise the gifts of God. The first is a principle I've come to saying in a number of different contexts. The first imperative is to love the indicative. The first imperative is to love the indicative. You can apply that a lot of different ways, but meaning the first thing you should do, what do I do? Love what is. Love what God has given. Love what He's supplied. Love how He has made things and what He has given. Love that. That's number one. So my first hope and prayer is that we would grow in gratitude for the common good. Second, I pray that we all grow in the art of establishing, cultivating, and conserving the common good in whatever community and station God places us. So that means courageously defending what is good, and it means patiently and wisely seeking to fix what is wrong, to reform what is not good. All of us have some role to play in cultivating community life with each other and with God. Everybody has a part to play. All parts of the body are necessary. And then in particular, I pray that this semester might spur some of you to take up particular vocations. It would make me very happy if some holy ambitions were hatched in chapel this semester. That in listening to the various speakers we'll have and the panelists that will be a part, that some of you will look and go, that. I could give my life to setting my mind on things above and then doing that. And some of that might be more theoretical, helping us to get more clarity about the glory of God and the common good and what's ideal, thinking more clearly and structuring things. And some of it could be really, really practical, as God stirs in you a holy ambition to see Christ honored and suffering relieved in these different spheres, whether in pro-life advocacy or family counseling or education or entrepreneurship or civic leadership. There might be some callings that God has, and I want you to be praying, God, if you have something for me, give me ears. I want to hear it. But in all of it, so I'll come back to where I started. My deepest prayer for this community is that we would be steadfastly heavenly minded and therefore be of great earthly and eternal good. Let me pray. Father, that was a lot. Definitions, no text in front of me to kind of constantly draw back to a distillation and condensation of lots of thinking. So I know it's a lot. But I pray, Lord, that you would take whatever was good and water it, make it bear fruit. Bless us this semester with your presence in chapel, and help us to see and hear what you are calling us to do, both as individuals and perhaps as a community. Where is the suffering that needs to be relieved? Where is the good that needs to be done? We want to be so fixed on you that we hear and know when you call. And then now, Lord, I pray for our shared meal. I pray that through this time, as we walk out these doors, get in line, get our plates, get our food, and sit at the table, you would cultivate and conserve and promote the common good of this community. That it would be rich and deep and life-giving, not only because the food is good, but because you're with us. In Jesus' name, amen. You are dismissed.
This presentation was made possible by the generous contributors to the Serious Joy Scholarship, permitting our graduates to launch into life and ministry without a burden of student loan debt.